Arizona Rural Development Council. We're joined here with Eliza Noland, our program director, and she is going to be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation. So continue to put your questions, comments, and if you're having any technical difficulties, I see a few folks still are unable to hear or see, so Eliza will be connecting with you to make sure that you are joined in with us. We also have Tom Savage, the Senior Legislative Associate with the League of Arizona Cities and Towns here to talk to us a little bit later about some of the high-level advancements that have been made on this issue to impact all rural communities statewide. So stay tuned for that. Before we dive right in, just a few housekeeping notes. We will be recording this presentation, so we'll be sending out the full recording after this is over. You'll be able to share it out. And then given the size of the group, as you can see, we've decided to mute our attendees, but we do have the chat box open for you for any questions and all of the above. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation. I will take a minute to stop after Tom's presentation so that we can ask him all the questions we have while we have him here as well, and then we'll have time at the end to get to anything else that that are lingering. And then, as you know, this is a very complex issue, so if there's a question that's asked that we do not have the immediate answer for, we will be connecting with resources and getting those answers to you. Okay, so let's get started. I do want to first talk about the title of this presentation, Continuing Conversations. This is a series that is designed to build on the discussions that were started at the Rural Policy Forum, so a way to continue sharing those resources and advancements in between each annual event so that we aren't stagnant. And this presentation itself is going to be talking about the Battle for Main Street session that was hosted this year in Eager Springerville. Our reviews from the forum talked about this session being one of the highest priorities for follow-up, so that's why this is going to be the first of the series. And from a Local First Arizona's perspective, from the Arizona Rural Development Council's perspective, one of the main pillars of a connected community is that attention to our built environment. Particularly, we emphasize adaptive reuse when possible over demolition and rebuild efforts. And the reason why, as we always talk about, is that preservation of our old architecture, saving those familiar structures that have been with the community for generations really is a key in fostering that sense of place that we always talk about, that connection to one's community, that unique culture that a town possesses. And all of that is needed for localism, for that community pride, that civic engagement, and of course that entrepreneurship that we hope to foster within each community. But while that is the ideal goal, we're all here because we understand that the issue of blight is very complicated and is plaguing many of our rural communities. So at the Rural Policy Forum, we had a panel come and talk about how these vacant and deteriorating buildings are truly costing our towns, communities, and businesses valuable equity and opportunity. So we had Larry Harmer with Community Development of the Town of Florence, Arizona, at the forum, and he spoke about some fine programs that they've enacted in Florence, and we'll have some more examples of similar programs later on in the presentation. We have Todd Pryor joined us at the panel, and he's a town manager of Superior, and he, along with Mayor Mila and the elected officials in the Copper Corridor, have really spearheaded the momentum in getting to the bottom of this issue in rural Arizona. So we'll be speaking more about their efforts throughout this presentation as well, and building on them. And then, of course, Travis Barnum, superhero that he is, with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, to talk about how the Brownsfield program can help in starting the process to rehabilitate these buildings. And again, I'll end on that at the end of this presentation in case anybody needs more information on their resources available. So here's just the general outline of today's presentation. We're going to be building upon what the panelists spoke about in August for those of you that were unable to attend, specifically looking at the types of landlords that we are seeing here in our rural communities, and then diving into the property tax rate structure that currently exists and how it is creating obstacles for being able to combat this issue effectively. We're going to jump over to Tom with the League of Arizona Cities and Towns for his update on what we're doing statewide at the legislature to hopefully eliminate some of these barriers. And then the feedback form that was attached to the registration of this webinar, a lot of you wanted to talk more about code enforcement, so we will be touching upon that after Tom's presentation. We'll be talking about a few more programs that have been enacted throughout the communities, and then finally ending with a summary of how ADEQ brownfields programs can help knock off that process. So to begin, let's talk about these types of landlords. We'll start with the ideal landlord, the one that's invested in the community that we hope all of our landlords would be. This landlord will ideally have the means to upkeep their buildings, are actively occupying the space in creative ways with local businesses, hopefully, or at least actively recruiting renters at a fair rate. So while that's ideal, we also have folks that have inherited buildings from family members or by other means, and these landlords could very much be those invested ideal landlords themselves. But many of them may or may not be living in the community. In some cases, they have the means to keep their buildings safe and managed, occupied with tenants. But more often than not, we're seeing that they've acquired these buildings in a situation when they didn't necessarily have the financial resources or the physical capacity to maintain their buildings. And then we have kind of the root of the issue, these predatory landlords that I want to call them. We've been using the word absentee landlord, and I want to shy away from that only because technically absentee landlords are just folks that don't reside in the community. And I would say that most predatory landlords do not reside in the community, but there are cases where we have out-of-town landowners that are shining examples and still in line with the community's connectivity. So I want to talk about these predatory landlords and that they are folks that have come in, purchased these properties at very cheap prices, have no connection or investment to the greater community, and are basically just letting their structures deteriorate so they can take advantage of the tax loophole that sits pretty much at the center of this issue. So let's just talk a little bit more about the tax issue right now. So currently, the way it's structured is our property taxes are based on assessed value of property and its assets. So in rural communities with the low rates of our property taxes, these uninvested property owners are incentivized to let their properties decrease in value rather than returning their buildings to a productive state and investing in them. And the reason being, if their building is worth less, they have to pay less taxes. But this model doesn't look at the true value of that building or the true impact that building has in the community. When a building is deteriorating, it's also lessening the value of the surrounding properties. So if you have a booming business across the street from a business with potential that is just being deteriorating, that booming business value goes down. And I want to also just mention, we're talking a lot about commercial spaces, but this also applies to residential spaces as well. So while this property may be costing this uninvested landowner a few $1,000s per decade, it's actually costing a town thousands of dollars per year in lost revenue, in increased fire suppression, in criminal activity, code enforcement that they then have to do on this dangerous building, let alone the lost economic activity. So the lost potential of what this building could be if there were tenants and if it was used in a creative space. Right now, the rates are set by the county assessor and the State Board of Equalization. Now, currently, our State Board of Equalization The appointees consist mostly of Maricopa and Pima County representatives, so there is no fair representation of our rural voice. And this issue is very unique to the prevalence of this issue is unique in rural communities. So without having that rural voice there, the board doesn't fully understand the complaints or the demands that our rural communities are trying to bring forth. And finally, the valuation process is in favor of the landowner itself. At the hearings, the Board of Equalization will hear from the county assessor and the property owner or their representative. So there really isn't input from the community to be able to combat the value that's assigned to the property, nor be able to argue its true impact on the community. So I want to turn over to some propositions that were made a year ago by Todd Pryor. Again, the Copper Corridor has propelled momentum in getting to the bottom of this issue. And last October, they held a town hall with 4 state representatives, in which Todd Pryor, manager of the city of Superior, outlined 5 propositions that would be helpful for rural communities to navigate this issue. So I just want to touch upon those. The representatives in the audience that day were TJ Shope, Dave Cook, Brenda Barton, and Wendy Benelli. So the first request of Mr. Pryor was that the Board of Equalization needs to have representation for our rural communities to represent our unique interest. We really need somebody that understands how this issue is impacting rural on that board. The second was that our towns need to have a voice in the appeal process. We need to have standing at the Board of Equalization, again, to have our have the intricacies of this issue be understood. And then pertaining to the valuation hearings, he proposed that they be more similar to zoning hearings in that the community is notified, the landowners within a certain vicinity also have an ability to provide their input on how the value is impacting their properties as well. This is a big one. State funding for dilapidated buildings. We'll be talking about a few programs that have been started in various rural communities, and they all get to a point with if a building's reacquired by the municipality, where are those funds coming from to be able to restore it to a functional use? So that is another task that has been brought up to our state legislator. And then finally, requirements for commercial buildings in town centers to be required to maintain utilities, safe conditions, and be inspected on a regular basis so that they are ready to be moved in for prospective businesses. So I want to now turn it over to Tom Savage with the League of Arizona Cities and Towns to talk about how the organization has kind of come into this discussion and what they are trying to do statewide.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Lauren. So, as she mentioned, I represent the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, and we are essentially the bridge organization between local government and the state legislature. And this issue came to us through our policy committee process, which was submitted by the Town of Superior. And they were explaining this ongoing issue that they've had with absentee landlords, where buildings within their commercial district were essentially falling apart through lack of upkeep or attention from the property owner. So this issue went through our resolutions process, was adopted at our League annual conference in August. And it gave direction to League staff to look at mechanisms that we can provide in either state statute or otherwise that would give tools for cities and towns that are facing these similar issues to address these properties within their community. So from there, we did a little bit of research. We went up to Superior to get a better idea of what the situation was. We toured their downtown and took a look at some of the buildings that had been, that are essentially the issues within the town. And we also went up to Miami to take a look at their downtown. And at the time, this was shortly after that fire occurred and damaged several buildings within their downtown. We also took a look at what other states and what other cities and towns across the nation are doing. And I think Lauren did a good job of listing out some of the ideas that have been put forth to address this issue. One of the ones that seems to get to the root cause of the issue is really the tax disparity between properties that are essentially in use and are assessed at a much higher value, and then these properties which we're trying to address, which are the properties that are dilapidated, because they're in such state of disrepair, they are assessed at a much lower rate, which leads to less revenue for the community to be able to allocate it to public services, police, fire, roads, administration of government, and also the subsequent issues of public safety, hazard. The buildings essentially become a fire hazard and become a hazard to adjacent properties. So the tax issue really is the root cause of this. Unfortunately, trying to address that is much, much more complicated than it sounds. And especially in election year, trying to address that at the state legislature, it's just not politically viable. So in our research, we wanted to see what other communities and other states are doing to address this. And one tool that we found that actually came from West Virginia was a vacant property registration. And so actually West Virginia has a state law that had enacted it and allowed for municipalities within the state to establish this program. There's also other examples that we found in Texas and in Ohio and other communities where there had been a major manufacturing presence that had left the area, and what's left is essentially the skeleton of that major manufacturing presence, and the community is left to address the issues with the buildings that are being that are essentially dilapidated and falling into disrepair. So we are in the process of putting forth or developing a piece of legislation that would give municipalities in Arizona the ability to enact such a program. Now, I want to avoid trying to give out too many details right now because we're not finished quite yet with the stakeholder process. We had just issued the initial draft to the small group of communities, particularly in the Copper Corridor, that are really interested in this issue. But essentially what we're looking for and what this program is designed to do is require these properties to undergo yearly inspections. So the idea is that we want to be able to identify if there's any structural or safety issues before they become a problem, before they become a situation, and I'm sure that Superior had a few examples, before they become a situation like up in Miami where that fire occurred and damaged several buildings within their downtown. We want to find out if there's any electrical, structural safety issues and address them before they become a problem to not only the integrity of the building but also to the safety of adjacent property owners. One of the other elements of the program is the ability to charge fees for maintaining this program, so fees for inspection and to keep the property within the program. Property owners, what the program would also do is require that the property owners maintain the property to code. and essentially the money, the fees that will be charged will be used to not only maintain the program, but also to make sure that the city or town will have the resources to maintain the public safety in and around the property and the surrounding area. So that's kind of the high level of what the program is designed to do. Where we're at right now, we're still in the initial stakeholder process just with the Copper Corridor communities. We really want them the opportunity to take a look at what we've drafted, make sure that it's going to be helpful for their communities and helpful for their situation, and then we're going to open it up to other communities in the state to see if they're having similar issues and if something like what we're proposing is something that will be beneficial for them. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll just leave it off with this. I think what we really need in order to be successful at the state legislature is really we need examples from your community of properties that are in a state of disrepair, that have been in a state of disrepair for a very long time, and you've tried to get the property owner to maintain the property to code, make it usable, but it's not been a successful endeavor. We really need those examples to be able to wrap them into our talking points when we're meeting with legislators as to why this will be an effective tool to address this situation. It's not intended, the reality is it won't get to the root cause of the problem, but it will at least give a tool in the toolbox for these communities to try to address this issue.
Okay, so looking at the discussion box right now, we have Barb Dow from Yarnell asking if there is a name for this proposed legislation yet. I don't know if it's developed far enough to have reached that point, but...
No, we don't have a name for the legislation.
Okay. And yeah, Barb, absolutely. Please write down Tom's information that's on the screen right now. Please send over any examples you have from Yarnell, and we would love for you to be part of this conversation. Vance is asking, do we wait for specific examples to bring this up with legislators? If I think the examples well, I'll let Tom reply to that.
Vance, can you expand on that question? Are you talking about specific examples of properties in your community? I was confused by the question. Vance, as of right now, I would hold off on bringing this up with legislators just until we have a final product that we're able to advocate for. If you have, however, if you do have examples of situations in your community, I'm assuming you're in District 14, so Cochise County. If you have any examples, feel free to send them our way. We would really like to be able to make this, when we're advocating for this, not just, Copper Corridor centric. We want to be able to at least provide examples of other communities in other jurisdictions, other legislative districts where this program would be helpful.
Great. And Kathy, she asked, is there a backstop to prevent property owners from tearing down historic buildings rather than bring these dilapidated buildings to code? We'll be talking about some experiences that communities have had a little bit later. If that question isn't answered, we'll circle back and see if we can have a larger discussion on that point. Okay, again, so, and then what happens if the local government owns the dilapidated building and they don't have the financial resources to bring it up to code? Will they be exempt? So, Tom, in the work that you guys are doing, will it also include buildings that are currently owned by municipalities?
Yes, to that point, there is an exemption in there. The example that we looked at in West Virginia actually exempted government property and government buildings, so federal, state, and local are included in that. The idea, and I think going back to the issue of charging fees to help sustain this program, one of the uses for the fee revenue is supposed to go back to not only maintaining public safety, but also addressing, being able to fix up some of the buildings. So it's a funding mechanism specifically for going back to Judy's question, to be able to address dilapidated structures.
Okay, and Tom, this is Liza, also with the Rural Development Council. Quick question for you. I know our rural communities across the state all really struggle with this issue, and opening up your email for input on some of that inventory and properties. Is there maybe just a simple list format that you'd like? For example, county, address, public or privately owned, maybe just a few things you'd want to know, or how should they best get you that information for inventory?
Yeah, if they can, if you have examples, I think probably the address of the property and pictures of the structure, and if there's, those are probably the most relevant pieces of information that we're going to need. Superior actually put together a list of properties that they have in their community. What they did is also include the assessed value of the properties and did a comparison to adjacent structures with the same information. So it was intended to give an idea of the tax disparity. I'm not expecting all of that information. What I'm just looking for is general location, and pictures of the structure are probably going to be the most sufficient information for us just to be able to present to lawmakers examples of properties if they're in their community or within their district.
Just offered some great advice. He said that one of their fire departments in Thatcher maintains a list with pictures, so maybe other communities have a similar resource and might want to reach out to fire departments to see what's already been collected.
Absolutely, thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Tom while we have him? We've got someone typing.
And just one more point that I'd like to make, and I think this is kind of in the same, when I was talking about the, trying to address the underlying tax issue and trying to get that addressed at the state legislature. I want to make sure that we're maintaining expectations on this because, the legislative process is very unpredictable, and so I want to make sure, even if we do present this at the legislature, there's no guarantee that this is going to pass. But we wanted to find what we thought was the most politically viable solution to this problem, that we can at least get one tool in the toolbox for these communities to use to be able to address problem properties within their community. So in that effort, and it's really important that we're able to provide examples to our legislators so that way they understand what this bill can mean to communities that they're representing. And to the next, does this include residential properties? It is silent on whether it be residential or commercial. In practice, when we've looked at examples in, for instance, Dallas has an example of a registration program, Charleston, West Virginia, and a few other communities, they are more directed to commercial buildings within their central business districts. But the legislation itself will be silent on whether it applies to residential or commercial.
Looks like that was the final question from Tom. If anything else arises, please continue to put that in the chat box and we'll revisit questions at the end of the presentation. Thanks so much for joining us, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay. So continuing along to the fun stuff, code enforcement. The input document that was attached to the registration for this webinar, a bunch of you had questions about specific code enforcement, who's responsible, what do we do? So I want to just kind of go through that process with you right now. Statewide, the policy is that our local jurisdictions are responsible for establishing and enforcing building codes and ordinances. And for our unincorporated folks, that responsibility then falls on your county. So I just want to skip ahead one slide real quick. This is a lot of text. You don't have to read it all. But there is a uniform code about abatement in dangerous buildings that really highlight, there's 18 different criteria to make something a dangerous building that's reportable. So I pulled some of the most prominent ones that I have heard our partners talk about within their communities. And these are all situations that would warrant a report to your county or to your local jurisdiction. So just to kind of go through a few of them, if any fire exits are blocked, if it's damaged by a natural disaster, if any part of that building is falling down or becoming dislodged or a hazard to surrounding buildings or people around, if it looks like it's going to completely collapse. Number 12 was interesting. If it's becoming a place for crime, for kids to hang out and get into bad things, for folks to kind of harbor in, that's also another reason to report. Again, if the fire marshal deems it a fire hazard, and if the structure has been abandoned for a period of 6 months. Now, this code is a national uniform code. However, our state government is able to amend it, your county governments are able to amend it, and your local municipalities are able to amend. So use this as a template on when you're trying to consider, is this something worth reporting? Again, just Google uniform code for abatement. I will also link it into the follow-up email so that you can see all 18 criteria. But the reason why I wanted to highlight that is because as we go through this code process, enforcement process, you'll see that it is quite extensive and requires a lot of resources from your towns to be able to carry out. So we want to eliminate any complaints that aren't actually violations in order to save as much resources as possible. So the way that it's laid out right now, a resident files a complaint. You could also, to have a little bit more impact, have a petition signed by multiple community members to give it a little bit more leverage. A letter is then sent to the property owners. There can be some difficulty in locating the owner if they aren't occupying the structure at the time. So that might be a setback. Once the letter is sent out and the owner is contacted, the inspection is conducted. So if violations are found, there will be a notice of violations issued back to that property owner. They'll be given an amount in time to be able to remedy those violations, and then once that expires, there will be another inspection. If at that point the violations still persist, then it'll be taken into legal action. And the issue with this is typically these predatory landowners have the funds to hire very good lawyers with a lot more resources than the ones that we are using at our town and community level. So they have the ability to kind of just spin this process over and over again. And what happens is money is just depleted from the community and no action is actually made. So there's a cost to the enforcement. A lot of our communities also do not have a specific enforcement officer, specifically our unincorporated folks and our really tiny towns and cities. So that's somebody that's spread over a region. It's somebody whose that task has been assigned to their other existing job. So the timely matter of this has been an issue. The cost, again, has been an issue. But you do have the right to submit complaints. So I would start by looking at your county code to see who's the person you should be contacting. Most times it's in their building department, or it may also be in their OSHA code if some communities define it as a health concern rather than a land use issue. But they'll be able to direct you to the right person if you give them a call. Okay, again, the uniform code, I'll be sending that out. Okay, so in navigating that, there are some communities that have enacted programs similar to the one that that they did in Florence that they spoke about on the panel at the Rural Policy Forum. So I was speaking with Ron Fogan, who is currently the city manager in Kingman, and he created this program at a previous job that he had. But this downtown vacant building program will basically require property owners to do two things. The first is to actively market their buildings or sell to tenants. And in order to do this, the city would decide upon a fee structure. So owners would have to pay a monthly fee until their building is listed. And then after a year, if their building still remains vacant, that fee is increased. So there's an annually increasing fee that's tacked onto that. It's up to the community how much they're going to want to charge. It needs to be enough to be a nuisance so that these absentee property owners that seem to be affluent enough to be able to afford to let their properties deteriorate regardless of the consequences would need to be incentivized to really pay attention. Some of the challenges with this first step is that owners, in order to comply, would list their building for double the cost of what it's currently worth, or what it was worth before it started to become inhabitable, so that they technically are complying with the ordinance, but they have no real intent to sell. And again, the enforcement issue is an issue for all of our communities, given their limited capacity. But the second part of his proposal was very interesting, and I've seen it in a lot of the communities that we're working in different creative ways. So he proposed that these landlords collaborate with the city to identify ways to kind of stage their properties in the meantime. So while they're actively trying to sell, do things to make them visually appealing to the community and visitors alike. So some of the examples, we have the first picture on the bottom left is Superior's Main Street. And they gave every building a fresh coat of paint, and it looks vibrant. Not all the buildings are filled, but it has become a walkable destination just because of its appearance. So that low-hanging fruit of just a quick coat of paint can really go a long way. We've also had a whole nother session at the Rural Policy Forum about the importance of murals and how that can impact a community connectedness. So again, any ugly structures or falling down structures that have a outward facing wall that is prominent in your community, consider putting up a mural so that it becomes a destination and an asset to the community while we're trying to bring it back to life. In Clifton, in Greenlee County, they have a beautiful main street with these historic structures, as you see in the last two pictures. Again, not all of them are filled, but they did this amazing initiative where they printed out photos from their mining days and lined the windows with them. So the main street has become a walking museum while they're trying to rehabilitate the buildings themselves for more creative uses. So these are all just simple low-hanging fruit examples of what can be done given the complicated structure that we're currently navigating. And I would love to hear from the attendees if there's any examples that your community has enacted or ideas that you've had for your community along these lines. Please share. We'll share them out to all attendees so that more ideas can be circulated. Okay, so another ordinance that communities are trying to enact, again, is this abatement ordinance. So how do we require our vacant building owners to keep up their buildings? Again, it would be a fine process. So the city, the town, or the county would have to enforce a series of fines. Again, enough of a nuisance for the landowners to pay attention to enforce that the building owners keep their property up to code. And if they aren't able to do that, that building then has to be taken over by whatever municipality the city decides. So whether that be the city, the county, a nonprofit in town. The issues with that, again, is how do we fund those repairs? And whoever takes over that property, how are they going to pay for any liens that have been placed on the property as it was deteriorating, the upkeep for any hazardous or conditions that the building possesses when they acquired it. So again, the proposal that Todd had last year when he sat down with the representatives, that there needs to be that fund or that aid to help our rural communities rehabilitate these buildings, is essential to the progress of this initiative. But while we are working within the means that we have, I do want to highlight the services of ADEQ because they have their brownfields program, which is the first step in getting these buildings rehabilitated and back to a state that can attract business owners and new buyers or renters. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality has a brownfields program. And what brownfields is defined as, I don't want to get this wrong, is an abandoned or underutilized property where reuse is complicated by actual or perceived environmental contamination. Okay, so you just have to have speculation that there could be hazardous waste within this building, and that's enough to get ADEQ's attention. So the criteria is it's underused, it has potential. So they're looking at, old schools, old retail places, old commercial buildings, fire departments, community buildings. And they come in and they will assess the building to see if it has any asbestos, lead paint, mold. And if so, their second phase is that they come in and remove all those substances. If this building that they're looking at is currently owned by a municipality, a nonprofit, a fire department, a school system, this service can all be done for free. They have a money allocated to them by the national program each year, which they then allocate out to the communities that apply for this resource each year. So each fiscal year for them begins July 1st, where they have a new pool of money to be able to address a new community. They also have a program specific for old gas stations to remove tanks, to reclaim the soil from any mine-stained properties as well, which is different than brownfields, but let me just put on this contact slide just so you can have, if you have any properties that seem to fit this criteria, please take down Travis's information. If he's not the right person, if it's exceeding the brownfields program, he'll be able to connect you with the right person. I do want to just also touch upon the national opportunities. So ADEQ is funded by the EPA. They have their state allocated funds each year, which we talked about can be allocated out for these remediated projects. But they also have a few grants that open up each year that can look at a community-wide assessment, which similar to what they're doing in the Copper Corridor, where instead of just identifying one property, they're doing an assessment of all the inventory in a region. So in this case, the Copper Corridor, to bring forth a proposal for more money from the national program. It's about $3,000 or $300,000 as opposed to the, I believe it's $2,000 that's allocated for the state each year. So again, if we unify in a region, we have more of a chance to be able to get those funds to start rehabilitating a larger scope of these buildings at once without having to tap into our state allocated funds. They also have site-specific assessments, the EPA, in case there is just one huge project that you need to tackle in your community, you can apply for that. All that information is over at grants.gov, which I will link in this follow-up email and provide some more contact information for the folks directly at EPA if you are interested in learning more about those programs. So hopefully that ends on a little bit more of a positive note. There are some things we can be doing within these constraints. Thankful for ADEQ and Travis's involvement in coming out to these communities, hearing what the needs actually are, and working with us to be flexible and try to get these resources to one another. I don't want to move away from his slide just in case folks are still copying down his information, but do we have any questions that have popped up in the meantime? I see a few folks are typing now. Please, if anything arises, please put that in the chat box. Yes, so Kathy, I will be sending out a copy of these slides along with the recording, so you'll be able to hear the presentations as well. And I see a few folks asking about the code. We will be sending out that code for the dangerous building. I'll send out, it'll have all 18 of them listed, not just the few that I picked out. I don't see any others. Does anybody else have any questions? And again, I know how complicated this issue is. If there's any other nuances that you need us to touch upon, the concept of this webinar series is to keep on learning and presenting more information as we get it. So it's crucial that you highlight the areas that we need to go more in depth on, so that next session will be able to address the issues that are prevalent in your community. Okay, I'm getting some thank yous. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, thank you all for joining us today. I will be sending out the recording of this by the end of the day today. Or if you email the AZRDC at localfirstaz.com, that comes directly to Liza, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions moving forward. And again, if there's any other prevalent issues impacting your rural community, please let us know. It'll help us inform the Rural Policy Forum and this webinar series moving forward. So thank you all for, the email address again is azrdc@localfirstaz.com. It should be up on the screen right now, but if you don't see it, I'll type it in real quick. That's okay, Leslie. Thanks so much. Thank you all for attending. Hope you have a good rest of your day.